The topic is Farmer of the Future. It could be called Farmer of Today as well. Producing this summit, I constantly hear the same old, the average age of the American farmer now tops 58. New farmers coming into the profession, down 20% over the last 5 years. Anyway, a lot of negative statistics, a lot of negative chatter, and it may all be true, but what we were determined to do was to put 4 young farmers up here. And it wasn't hard for me to find these folks. It wasn't like I had to go out searching far and wide. So what we're going to do for the next 25 minutes or so is just have a discussion. I'm going to let these people talk a little bit about themselves, how they got here, and then we're going to open up the discussion, and hopefully we're going to include all of you. To my left is Christine McInnes, Chief Executive Officer of Athena Organic Farms and Grown Here Farms. Then we have Jessica Vaughn, who's the Greenhouse Manager for Jacobs Farm, Del Cabo Incorporated. Then we have Kevin Watt, Head of Land and Livestock at Tomcat Ranch. And finally, last but not least, we have David Zaitz, who is the CEO of Piper Farms. And with that, I'm going to let each of you just talk for a minute or two about how you got to this stage and maybe where you came from.
Starting with me?
Sure.
Yeah. So I joke about it being a combination of naivety and stupidity. But really my background is in sustainable development. And so we were building sustainable projects. And I saw that the natural next integration point was urban farm communities. And so in my mind, I thought, well, if we're going to integrate urban farming into residential design, we should own an organic farm. And so that's what prompted my move into sustainable farming. And we now have one of the largest organic farms outside of the Lower Mainland in British Columbia, and greenhouse operation as well. And we are, the best way for me to describe it is like franchising a farm in a sense. So we're really making a move to replicate what we're doing, to invite new farmers to utilize our model to enter this space.
Great. Jessica?
Well, I can say that if you look back like 5 years ago today, I was definitely not wearing cowboy boots. I was definitely not, sitting here with you fine people in Salinas. I was a little farther north in Silicon Valley in Google headquarters in Mountain View, sitting around a conference room table talking about the finer points of marketing strategy. Meanwhile, thinking about how I'd rather be at home turning in the cover crops into my home garden. And that was the culmination of basically my whole upbringing with a couple of lovely Berkeley hippies, my parents, who always had a vegetable garden. And so I always helped my mom, and I always had a part in our home garden and landscaping and so on. And I just had this love for plants and horticulture. So as I grew up, I had this whole other vision, went through my undergrad for communications and marketing, went into advertising, went into high tech, but the whole while knowing and thinking that I would at some point end up with plants. And so working at Google for 9 years and 12 years in the high-tech space, I would take night classes, I would go do weekend events, all with plants. And at some point, I think right around that time, I was digging my stilettos into the carpet of that conference room, it clicked, and I was ready for something else. So I left high-tech, I left Silicon Valley, moved down to Santa Cruz, went back to school, got an agriculture degree, and in the process, thinking I was going to go into organic field farming, I took some greenhouse design classes, hydroponics, other types of alternative crop production, including organic crop production, and ended up, after finishing my degree, finding Jacob's Farm. And they needed somebody to come help them figure out organic hydroponic crop production. And they had a greenhouse close by, and so that's where I am today. 3 years ago, I joined up with them and did hydroponic crop production for them for a number of years, and now I'm managing the greenhouses for them here in Santa Cruz County. So,
Great. Kevin?
Hi, everybody. So, like most ranchers, I came from a data science and electoral studies background. But, quite honestly, data science and politics play a huge role in ranching, and it's been a really cool marriage, but it certainly was an uphill climb. So I had previously been focused on those disciplines, but had been really inspired by seeing how undervalued the co-benefits of agriculture were. Agriculture, as you all know, sits at the intersection of so many different parts of human and wildlife, and I was just struck by the potential for it to impact in a really meaningful way. But it's hard to quantify. It's hard to showcase these co-benefits. And while we're just starting to really embrace precision farming, precision ranching is still sort of a joke. And so we're hoping to change that. And so my work started with my own little pastured poultry and hog operation that then grew over time into now I work with Tomcat Ranch and their educational foundation to really look for what the demonstrable benefits are for regenerative rangeland management and finding the technology tools that help us go beyond our primate brains and really understand these exponential, complex, and interdependent systems. So it's awesome that I get to be with cows and go inside and work on the computer, but in 2 years you'll have my son here because he knows more about tractors than anybody. So he's the rancher of the future.
David, you come from a farm background, but you're doing something a little different than what you grew up, right?
Yeah. So I grew up with it and on a dairy farm in North Carolina, but I think a lot of farmers throughout time have to adapt, and my family did the same thing. So my dad went and started an internet company, and he started taking on outside capital, so it was a family operation became not there. So I went to college, and all the other smart kids wanted to be investment bankers, and I just got competitive, and so that's what I did. But some of the things that my dad had done earlier in his career were winding down, and the saying is once you start farming, you can't stop because of tax implications and things on land. That was from my great-grandfather. So we started looking around just for the next land purchase, and we had this thesis around the rising corn belt and farming further into Canada. So we looked in northern Minnesota, and we found some land, and we started talking to a seed potato farmer who was there named Scott Piper. And he had one leg that he lost in a tractor accident. And, as I started talking to him, he was selling seed potatoes in Idaho and Washington and Florida and Uruguay and all these other places. And I said, why would anyone buy seed potatoes from northern Minnesota when they can just get them in their backyard in Idaho? And we realized that there was something more to the business, so I quit my job to start helping him. And from there, we came up with an agreement for where I would take over the business over a period of a few years. And, it was around that time that it, became this responsibility for managing what was also the family business. And so, it was kind of a great way to transition to a very high barrier to entry business. I couldn't have done it without someone like Scott bringing me in. But since then, it's been an incredible opportunity for me to learn, and since then we've grown from 300 acres to 750, and we have great prospects for growth in the future, and we have a nice value proposition that we've been able to pull together.
Have any of you ever questioned your decision? Seriously, have you questioned it? If you have, why? And maybe how did you get through it?
Every day. We were talking about this backstage a bit, and it is very hard to describe the amount of love that you have for this job. And it's also very hard to describe the amount of struggle and the amount of conflict and the amount of challenges that you're addressing on a daily basis. And if you're somebody that's a crazy entrepreneur, like I think all of us are, that is one of the most exciting opportunities that there is. So absolutely, every day I question my decision, but only because it makes me better. It makes me recommit in every day and every moment to this, it's not even a job anymore, it's really a purpose and a mission, and it's about creating impact. And I don't think there's any greater job in the world than that.
Great. Jessica, do you ever miss the Google conference room, or?
The conference room? No, I don't. Not even when I'm sitting around the conference room that we do have at the farm and looking at the leaking ceiling and so on. But no, I miss the food at some points, but I will say I don't miss the security, which is a weird thing to say because don't we all want security and stability? And my parents remind me constantly that I walked away from safety and security. But the feeling of knowing that I'm going to a job every day that is a purpose, that I can get up away from my desk, which I do have stuffed in the back of the greenhouse, and I can walk out to the field and I know that I'm doing exactly what I want to do. That makes it okay.
Kevin?
No, and I'm only about 10 years in, and several thousand chickens and hundreds of broken water pipes haven't steered me off course yet, but I can empathize in that I really understand why people would want to remove themselves from the uncertainty of working with nature. I mean, this is such a complex system, but that uncertainty is there in urban and suburban lives too. It's just so much more apparent in working in agriculture, and I really loved that, but I respect why there are some people that just say no thank you.
David, are you happy, or should you have stayed on the investment banking track?
Well, I never wanted to be in banking to begin with. I knew I wanted to get into agriculture. I just didn't know how to make that happen right away. So I definitely got a skill set from doing what I did that I've been able to apply to the business, but I think the only time I've really missed it was when we had 22 containers in Russia and we were incurring demurrage fees, and I was staying up every night until 6 in the morning arguing with Russian people. So that incident aside, it's been pretty good.
There was a lot of talk over the last day and a half about resources and support and how do you foster innovation, and we heard from University of California, we had stuff out at Hartnell. Is there something you could point to that you wish you had had more support in your decision or more resources, or is it really just a singular choice that you have to make on your own and just go for it?
It's really tough. One of the challenges that we've encountered that we didn't anticipate encountering is the mentality that exists in the industry already. And so, we are very much a misfit, very much outside of the lines of the established way of doing things. I live in Vancouver and run our farm, which is about 4.5 hours north of where I'm located. That boggles people's minds who are in farming. And so a lot of the lack of support is more about being open-minded to different ideas, different opportunities, different ways of doing things. And truthfully, we really have felt alone in that, and that we have to innovate on our own and find other crazy people to innovate with us, and that has been very challenging to navigate.
I have to say that the lack of support or the lack of like a roadmap for changing your life and getting into agriculture, regardless of what industry you're in, is actually what's been the most helpful for me. Because there is no one that's like, well, if you want to quit your really like high-paying, high-tech job and get into farming, here's how you do it. No, everyone looks at you like you're insane, and they're like, well, good luck with that. But as soon as you start going down that path, and at least in this area, I mean, the Salinas Valley, Central Coast, California, people seem very welcoming to new ideas, new energy, and anybody who wants to get into agriculture anew, somebody who doesn't have a background in agriculture. So I found that first step the hardest to make. But as far as once I was in, I've really not found anything other than enthusiasm from the agricultural community to like welcome in new people.
I would echo that in saying that the lack of support or direction in the transition really empowered me to be agnostic about what methods made sense in my context. And I got to kind of cherry pick from all of the different traditions and dogmas around agriculture, which can get very heated, but it's fantastic to come from the outside and just say, I'll find my own path, and I hope it works. So, yeah.
And then when something doesn't work, people are like, well, obviously they don't know what they're doing. And you're like, obviously, I have no idea. I'm just going to try it and see if it works.
That's great.
And how long does it take before you don't feel like an outsider or an interloper? I've got a cousin who moved up to Vermont, I think 25 years ago, and then opened a tavern. And he said it took about 20 years before people stopped referring to him as the guy from Jersey. You know, and they started to consider him a Vermonter. He raised his family, you know, been up there for 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
Is it the same in farming? Are you still looked at as like the new kid on the block, or?
We have third generation families on the coast who are still the new folks who have shown up, so it's just part of how it goes. But I kind of feel like you are invited into the community when you get called when there's a crisis. So when your neighbor asks for your help, it's kind of like, okay, I'm respected and I'm in there. And that happened a few years ago, and it's like a mark of pride for us.
One of the themes of the last few days, you know, we've talked a lot about innovation and how you support innovation. I guess the one thing that I'm still grappling with is, it seems to me that too often it's still looked at as competitive advantage, and that there's not enough collaboration between growers. And in other words, you know, if they find something good for their plant or they find something good in the field, it doesn't seem like there's a rush to go out and share that with everyone else because it's looked at as competitive advantage. Do you think we move through that with your generation? Do you think we move beyond that?
No.
Okay. No, it's interesting.
In the potato industry, it's just competitive, and you know, potato consumption in the U.S. is flat to slightly down, and so unfortunately, the only way that I accumulate business is from taking it from other people. And you know, there's a huge function of that is farmer age, guys retiring and freeing up that business from the customer who's done business with him for 15, 25 years. And you know, I need every advantage that I can get. So, you know, to the extent though that you find certain people who you don't necessarily overlap completely with. So I have guys on the West Coast and in Washington who are definitely competitors in areas, but who I necessarily can't compete with on a freight advantage perspective. But from them, you know, we can help fill each other's orders if we're short, and there's a trust basis on quality where we know that if I go in and I broker a load of seed from them, that I'm not betraying the quality that my customers expect. So, But in terms of if someone else said, I want to get into the seed potato business, I would say, good luck.
Is that true for the rest of you, or?
Well, I was just going to say, we really believe in the power of partnership. And so we've always had this kind of collaborative mentality and an abundance mentality. If we do better, our neighbors do better, everybody does better. And the interesting thing about that is not everybody shares that same philosophy. And so what we have found is that those collaborative efforts have served us more so on the branding side and on the marketing side and doing outreach in those areas, which are really important to us, and a little less on the growing side and the operating side, where there is more reluctance to kind of share best practices or share insights, because there's this kind of we're friends, but we're also enemies mentality that has kind of, we've definitely encountered.
Okay. I think I'd like to open it up for a couple questions if we have them from the audience. Right over here.
There's quite a few organizations that have programs, put quite a bit of effort into programs for young farmers and beginning farmers, Farm Bureau, Farm Credit Services, USDA. And I'm curious, did any of you utilize those? Did you know about them? Did you find them helpful?
No. I can say that when I started down this path, I didn't really know how to get into agriculture, farming, like where I would really fit well. And what I ended up doing was falling back on my sort of educational, like research-based sort of mind, which was, well, I don't know enough about it to go get into the field, much like I didn't know much about marketing and communications before I went into the field, so I'm gonna go back to school. And so that was my approach to it. Although I always wished my parents would have gotten me into 4-H. Because when we had our panelists up here earlier talking about 4-H, that I feel like is a good way to get people into agriculture and ranching at a young age, and I never did, even though it was totally available to me. So.
That's interesting. Yes, I had known about those programs and I had been sort of curious, but we were trying to sort of create or brave a new niche that was using livestock principally as like a land management tool, as a ecosystem services as the primary value, and then as a secondary value, there's this amazing and nutrient-dense meat. And so that path wasn't very clear yet because the research is still being sort of borne out and the messaging certainly is still being worked out. And so, yeah, those were really great for sort of finding my way into where ranching and farming was, but I wanted to go sort of one step further down the road.
Great. You have some more questions? A hard time seeing. Come on, Rob, help me out.
There's your guy.
My question was more about the business side, learning the business side of farming. Where do you learn those kind of skills?
I'll go
The hard way?
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting, and all of us chatted about this earlier, is when you come from, I don't come from a generation of family farmers, and so I bring the diversity of the background that I've come from with me to farming. And that's created a lot of space for innovation, for efficiencies, for bringing fresh mentality to antiquated processes. And so we run our farm like a very tight, well-oiled machine, and that's just good business practices. And I think that's the same no matter what field you're in.
Anyone else?
I would say from the business side, and kind of going back to your question about collaboration, at least in the regenerative space, it's such a nascent field that there is this sort of cross-pollination of, oh, well, this message works, or try and choose this management style. And that idea of, yes, we're in competition, But we also know that if the whole field succeeds and if the messages get out there, we all win. And so I got a lot of the education, business-wise and marketing-wise, through the other producers, and that was such a gift.
Yeah, and like for me, I always go back to the same core points, which is true of any company: leadership. Leadership is the foundation of everything that's going to make a company great, and without great leadership, doesn't matter what field you're in, you're not going to be successful. And so if you're a good, strong leader and you have a team of good, strong leaders, then I really think there's nothing that you can't accomplish.
Well, this was the one thing that I really brought from my old life in high tech and communications to the farming world was the concepts that exist in high tech. The concept of launch and iterate does not, or at least I have not found to have it exist in any strong way in agriculture. Whereas in high tech, the concept of launching something, seeing what works, changing it, launching again, and keeping this process rolling is something that was just ingrained in me from years of doing that. And bringing that to the farming world has been, I think, pretty beneficial for our company. And it's a little difficult to get people to adopt it because it's scary. But that has been a really helpful tool from a business perspective.
For me, I had a strong business background coming from finance, and I went out and found a really great COO who's 61 years old and 35 years in the business, and the two of us kind of filled each other's weaknesses. And our communication is really strong, and it's been a really unique partnership, I think, between someone my age and a younger generation, trying to take what is this 55 to 65-year-old generation, which I think is where the majority of the farming knowledge and talent is, and trying to transition those things into processes, SOPs, and something that's transferable throughout the business. So for me, learning the business side was more about taking what I know and helping bring that to someone who has a really powerful lifetime of business experience in the seed potato industry, and transferring that to other people.
Great. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap it up.
We had one more.
One more? All right, let's make it quick.
It will be quick. This is actually more of a statement and a comment than it is a question, and it has a lot to do with regards to funding for new farming. And what we discovered with our farm that was really frustrating was that most of the grants and funding opportunities were only retroactively available, in such regard that if you started farming and bungled it, then you could seek grants to fix it. But there wasn't financing available for really good business sense to move forward. Everything was retroactive and corrective. Nothing was foresight to make sure you didn't get into trouble. And that's where we got so frustrated in seeking sourcing, is because you had to screw up for about 2 years before you could actually get forward, which just seems silly. So that was just my statement, sort of directed at that gentleman over there, but also possibly a reason why you panelists also didn't go down the route of funding, because it's not really available if you're being progressive.
All right, well, thank you. And with that, I'd like to thank our farmers of the future. It was a great conversation.